Something remarkable is happening in Canadian schools. It's not a new curriculum or technology, it's a sound. Laughter now fills the halls, replacing the tense silence of exam prep. Students encourage each other, no longer competing in isolation. At Maplewood Secondary, this change is unmistakable. Margaret Lewis's English class buzzes with conversation and shared stories, not grammar drills. This is a revolution in education, sparked by a teacher who dared to listen. Margaret's students are happier, more engaged, and their attitudes toward learning have transformed. The secret? A teaching philosophy from the Philippines, rooted in warmth, empathy, and connection. In her classroom, students gather in groups, discussing novels, with passion. Once shy students now speak up, helping each other with patience and kindness. Margaret acts as a guide, listening more than lecturing, encouraging more than correcting. Her classroom is a microcosm of a new Canada, one learning to connect, the Filipino way. This movement is spreading, proving that education thrives in kindness. It challenges the idea that academic rigor must come at the cost of well-being. Margaret, once a traditional teacher on the verge of burnout, felt something was missing. She was about to discover that the key to unlocking her students' potential and her own was waiting in the most unexpected place. The story of this transformation begins with a single, powerful moment, and it all started with a story that changed everything. Before the change, Margaret Lewis was the model of a traditional educator. Her classroom was orderly, her lessons rigorous, her standards high. But beneath the surface, anxiety and disengagement grew. Students were stressed, overwhelmed, and disconnected from the joy of learning. They could recite grammar rules but struggled to express themselves. Margaret felt like she was running a factory for exam takers, not nurturing young minds. The pressure to meet benchmarks left little room for building confidence or community. Essays returned covered in red ink only deepened students' fear of mistakes. The connection she once felt with her students faded, replaced by cold formality. Each morning, she delivered lessons but felt a profound disconnect. It was as if a glass wall separated her from her students. She followed the playbook of generations past, but the game had changed. Her students needed more than a lecturer, they needed a mentor and ally. Margaret didn't know how to become that. The silence in her classroom wasn't focus, it was quiet desperation. She was delivering information but not reaching hearts. Something had to change. And soon, it would. The turning point came on a dreary Tuesday. Margaret assigned a personal essay about family traditions. Most responses were polite, well-structured but lacked emotion. Then Leo, a quiet Filipino student, shared his story. He spoke of pasalubong, the Filipino tradition of bringing gifts from a journey. Leo described his mother, a nurse working abroad, returning home with small, thoughtful gifts for everyone. Each gift was a message. I was thinking of you. As Leo spoke, the class fell silent. Not with anxiety, but with shared humanity. He explained that the value was in the gesture, not the gift. His story dissolved the glass wall in Margaret's classroom. In 10 minutes, Leo taught more about connection than weeks of grammar lessons. Margaret realized she'd focused on mechanics, forgetting language's true purpose, to connect us. Leo's story was a gift, a reminder that teaching, like giving, must come from the heart. Margaret knew she had to change. Inspired, Margaret asked Leo about learning English in the Philippines. He spoke of a classroom filled with encouragement, where every small success was celebrated. His teacher, Mrs. Reyes, started each class with a simple check-in, one good thing that happened to you. Group activities felt like family gatherings, not competitions. Margaret dove into research, discovering the Filipino approach was rooted in pakikipagkapwa-tao, treating others with humanity and equality. Teachers were mentors, guiding with patience and kindness. Gratitude and mutual respect were central, motivating students to do their best. The goal wasn't just fluency, but confident, heartfelt communication. Margaret realized her students needed encouragement, not more red ink. The Filipino way wasn't about lowering standards, but building students up to reach them. It was about teaching the whole person. Margaret knew she couldn't just read about this philosophy, she had to experience it. She needed to learn from someone who lived it. The next step was clear. She reached out for help. Margaret found Belle, a Filipino tutor in Toronto. Their first session began with a simple question, "How is your heart today?" Margaret shared her struggles. Belle listened with empathy. Belle introduced the concept of malasakit, deep caring for others. "See your students as gardens to nurture," Belle advised. Margaret learned to start classes with personal check-ins and to celebrate small victories. Belle modeled relentless encouragement, correcting gently and affirming effort. Margaret realized how powerful positive feedback could be. If she blossomed under encouragement, how much more would her students? Bell taught that teaching with the Filipino heart meant creating a classroom family. Collaboration replaced competition. Sharing from the heart replaced performing perfectly. Margaret finished her sessions renewed, ready to bring her classroom back to life. She had new techniques and a new spirit. The transformation was about to begin. Margaret was ready. Margaret returned to Maplewood with a mission. She rearranged desks into circles and began class with, "How is your heart today?" At first, students were hesitant, but soon they opened up. Margaret swapped her red pen for green, highlighting strengths before offering suggestions. Every class started with a good news minute, celebrating small victories. She introduced the appreciation circle, where students thanked each other. Tulong Aral, study help partners, encouraged mutual learning. The competitive edge softened into mutual support. Margaret smiled and listened more, sharing her own struggles. She became a fellow traveler, not just a teacher. By investing in her students as people, they invested more in her class. The glass wall was gone, replaced by trust and respect. The results were undeniable. The classroom atmosphere transformed. Laughter and collaboration replaced tension. Silent students became active participants. Shy voices grew confident. Class discussions became lively, passionate, and respectful. Margaret saw individual transformations. Anxious students led presentations. Struggling students excelled with peer support. Leo, once quiet, became a class leader. The impact spread beyond her classroom. Other teachers noticed the change. Students were more engaged, supportive, and willing to participate in all subjects. Margaret's greatest reward was seeing her students become kinder, more empathetic people. The appreciation circle rewired their interactions. Lifting others up became the norm. They built a community based on Filipino values of connection and care. Students weren't just learning English, they were finding their voices. They were becoming better people. Margaret set out to improve English skills, but ended up enriching lives. The transformation was complete. To understand the roots of this philosophy, Margaret traveled to the Philippines. Bell connected her with a school in Manila. From the start, Margaret was welcomed as family. She observed classrooms filled with warmth, laughter, and genuine connection. Teachers knew their students' families, struggles, and dreams. High expectations were balanced with deep affection. Margaret met the principal, Mrs. Santos, who explained, "We don't teach subjects, we teach children. A child who feels loved will learn anything." Margaret saw Bayanihan, the spirit of community, everywhere. Kindness in the classroom reflected a culture where human connection is the highest value. The Filipino approach wasn't a technique, it was a way of life. Margaret realized the power of relationships in learning. She wasn't just observing teaching, she was witnessing a culture of care. The experience changed her perspective forever. She returned home with a new mission. The journey had come full circle. Back in Canada, Margaret was transformed. She shared her story with colleagues, inviting them to observe her new methods. Skepticism faded as results spoke for themselves. Students were more engaged and confident. Other teachers adopted her techniques, personal check-ins, green pens, and appreciation circles. The school's climate shifted. Laughter and community spread. Word spread, and Margaret spoke at district events, sharing Filipino values in a Canadian context. She argued that student well-being is the foundation of achievement. Teachers formed support groups, and school boards began to value student engagement and well-being. The movement grew, a grassroots shift toward kindness in education. It all started with one teacher who chose connection over correction. The Filipino heart wasn't about changing culture, it was about embracing a universal truth. The shortest distance between two people is a shared story, and the strongest foundation for learning is a heart that feels seen, safe, and valued.